and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at the Geneva conference, the much-awaited conference for Pakistan, of course, as a response to global climate change and what Pakistan has witnessed in 2022, the devastating floods, something, of course, that we've been seeing and unfortunately been trying to recover from. And, of course, it's going to take a long time. And Pakistan, of course, has demanded climate change justice in the aftermath of these floods. And this particular conference is also a part of that appeal. This is something that's important in terms of the conversation around loss and damage. That was one little success that was achieved at the COP27, and we hope, of course, to get more responses within this conference. And a number, of course, of countries and multilateral organizations have responded with over 10 billion in commitments. This is, of course, a success for Pakistan that we'll be taking a look at in the show. The country last year. This was, of course, extremely important in terms of the economic challenges that Pakistan continues to face, and also with regards to the kind of rehabilitation and recovery plan that Pakistan has, which of course requires its own resources. Last year, Pakistan had a little victory with regards to the conversation around loss and damage being included in the entire discourse around climate change, and we were hoping a lot to come out from this particular conference as well with regards to the international community responding to the call from Pakistan for climate change justice. And perhaps this call has been heard. So far, we've seen a number of countries coming forward and pledging their commitments towards financial support for Pakistan. And this would be important, especially in the kind of challenges that the country faces in the remaining fiscal year, the kind of recovery that is required within Pakistan, and also very important and significant in light of the global challenges that exist around economy, the kind of attention that existed with regards to conflicts in areas such as Ukraine and otherwise, and the overall climate change response which was emphasized by the UN Secretary General time and again as something that requires collective action. And we were hoping, of course, to be able to see that. There was, of course, a lot of talk with regards to donors' fatigue and, of course, the attention being diverted to other areas as well. But what we've so far seen in terms of the numbers, it is quite encouraging. And we'll come to that later. But let's take a look at what the Prime Minister said today, and then we'll continue the discussion.
Resilient societies look for the light of opportunity in the darkness of disaster. It is precisely this kind of strategic reset that I'm trying to kickstart today in seeking your support for a recovery plan for the people of Pakistan who are, by the grace of God, very resilient. I know these are times of extreme pressure and economic hardships in many countries, but Pakistan needs a new coalition of the willing, one that can save lives and put them on a path to responsible global citizenship. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm asking of you is more than a rebooting of your compassion for humanitarian relief needs. Today, I am asking for your support for those who have lost their life savings, their homes and livelihoods, those who are sitting under blue sky, facing the harshest of winters and looking forward to your help and support from mankind. I am asking for a sustained international support plan to meet this daunting challenge. I am asking for a new lifeline for people who need to power our economy and re-enter the 21st century with a future that is protected for such extreme risks to human security. Together, we have to rebuild their lives and their dreams. Your solidarity and long-term support to the people of Pakistan at this very critical juncture will make the difference between staying unprepared or facing the future with renewed hope and aspirations.
Well, you heard what the Prime Minister spoke about, and extremely important, of course, for the world to be able to realize that. And so far, we've, of course, seen a lot of countries stepping forward in this regard. In the first plenary of this conference, the Information Minister talked about how the countries have come forward with more than $8 billion in support, with countries coming forward with huge numbers, such as the European Union pledging 93 million, Germany 88, China 100, the Islamic Development Bank 4.2 billion, World Bank 2 billion, Japan 77 107, the Asian Development Bank 1.5, USAID 100, France 345. And of course, in the second, as it has begun, we've also seen the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank pledging another 1 billion. Of course, many other countries that have stepped forward and pledged their amounts as well. But what's of course important with regards to these commitments is also how Pakistan is going to be able to take this forward, especially in the aftermath of what we saw last year as well on a number of commitments, that perhaps the kind of issues that Pakistan was facing, it required a lot more action in terms of follow-ups and having a more proactive approach that wasn't there. And so we are hoping to see that coming in the challenges that now exist. We'll talk more about this particular conference and the climate change issues in Pakistan's response in our show today. And for this, of course, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farooq Patafi. We've also been joined in the studios by social development and research expert Mr. Waqar Shirazi. Thank you very much, Waqar Sahab, for being with us in the studios today. We've also been joined online by Dr. Ghulam Samad, economist at Carrick Institute, ADP. We've also been joined by Eric Shazza, who's an environmentalist and agenda contributor for the WEF. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us and joining us for this conversation. Let me start with you, Waqar Sahab. When we take a look at the conference, it is important, of course, to understand that there have been a number of concerns that were shared prior to the beginning of this conference as to how exactly the world community is going to respond, and a number of comparisons were drawn to previous conferences or the previous responses that we have seen. In terms of what we have seen so far in the way that the countries have stepped forward, how do you think the response has been so far? Is this something which is parallel with the needs that Pakistan faces currently and the kind of economic challenges that exist?
Well, it is not too early now to say that Pakistan has marked again a success on diplomatic juncture. Bringing about $10 billion in response to the massive floods in Pakistan is yet another success by convincing the international community that Pakistan has been facing a challenge and a humanitarian crisis on the basis of the sufferings and the displacements and the catastrophe that has happened in Pakistan. I think that the response from international community was a bit too late, but Pakistan's voice was constantly echoing in the international community, calling for the support on humanitarian grounds. And finally, we are there, that we have marked a success. I think that rest of the countries will also be following the footprints of the countries who have already committed. But we'll have to see that how we proceed and how we pursue this matter, because it has been observed previously that in many of the pledges, the actual amount which is transferred to the affected countries is not actually the same with the level of pledges. So we'll have to pursue it efficiently and effectively, and we'll have to keep on convincing the international community. By the way, the requirement from Pakistan was $8 billion, as Pakistan has said that Pakistan needs overall $16 billion for disaster resilience infrastructure and for rehabilitation of the communities that has been affected by the floods. But in response to, against the requirement of $16 billion, Pakistan requested only $8 billion from international community. And so far, more than $10 billion have been pledged by the international community. So I think that we have achieved our milestone, even beyond, and we'll keep on our good progress in this regard. And let's see and let's hope that this money comes to Pakistan in a way which it is committed, and it goes to the actual affected population in a way it is foreseen.
Absolutely, and these are of course important points that we'll discuss further as well. But Dr. Ghulam, considering the point regarding the issue of obtaining the same amount as it is being pledged, where do you think this gap lies? Is it in terms of the kind of requisites that are there with regards to these pledges, or the kind of follow-ups that are required by countries like Pakistan, or is it the mere fact that the intention or the action plan sort of changes along the way as we see further dynamics evolve or situation on ground change? What exactly is the issue when we talk about the difference between pledges and the actual amounts received?
Thank you so much, Sana, for having me. I think let me first second my colleague that the Pakistan has successfully defended, I would say, presented the case in the Geneva conference. Let me quickly jump into your question. I think here the good news is that so far $10 billion been pledged. But if you look into the distribution of these pledges, most of them, I think more than 8 billion so far, is from the multilateral organizations. So that is a good news for us. When it comes to the multilateral development organization or institutions, then the pledges become easily to the commitments. And there's the conditioners or attached there, but it becomes easily transforms to the exchequer. If you look into here, the bilateral commitment, we do have bilateral commitments, as you mentioned in your beginnings, but those bilateral commitments are so far in millions, though that are very much crucial and very much important for us. So if I can look into the overall more than 10.7 billion pledges so far, I think there is a positive hope, and the positive hopes that I can see here is that it's been pledged to the multilateral development organizations. I can see the concern of most of the colleagues that probably when it comes to the global recessions, probably there will be something might be that cause the limitation or that might cause the hindrances in the releasing of the pledges. But here I can if you can follow the today's overall discourse, I can see lots of even bilateral commitments there. Lots of countries been engaged there. So far, if I can look into the first plenary achievements and the engagement from the international community, it's been very positive. So I'm hopeful that the pledges that will, especially from the multilateral organizations, they are hopeful. I do see down the line that how these pledges can be materialized. I think that is an issue, but it all depends that how proactively we can programs the projects or the concerns once this whole thing has been, especially in terms of the development conference has been end today, then how we can basically follow up these pledges and how we can program the pledges so that we can be engaged with the multilateral development organization and with the bilateral organization that had pledges today.
Right, absolutely. Farooq, a large part of the conference was also based on Pakistan's ability to emphasize on its recovery plan as well and how exactly it's going to act in terms of the kind of responses needed with reference to the floods. And that is perhaps also something that organizations such as like the IMF was also looking forward to in terms of what Pakistan will be able to do. And we, of course, have meetings on the sidelines as well. But in terms of the way that the international community or the multilateral organizations have responded, within this conference, do you think that that has an impact also in terms of Pakistan's credibility in tackling the issues around climate change and will then have an impact on our discussions with the IMF?
Right. Sana, I think it is a brilliant question because it has many parts. And let me first start by actually expressing gratitude. We can actually, congratulate ourselves, for a lot of things. But at this moment, had it not been for the world community, I think this event could not have materialized. One example, and great example, is Secretary General of the UN. Today I tweeted as well, but since then this claim or this idea has even grown further. I had said that if I had, if it was within my power, I would have, installed his statue here in Islamabad. But now I'm going to say that we have mountains. I would have actually, carved a Mount Rushmore size of, statue of him. I think that few people and few times have seen such benefactors, such great friends of the country. He was great. He has been very generous and very kind. Then, of course, all these countries, because today's event, Sana, while we can focus on our bit where we were explaining our stories, we heard all the donor countries we keep on saying that the commitment perhaps was shy of whatever was demanded through the UN system. But the kind of services that have been rendered right from America to China, America's air bridge, China's support, Turkey and UAE actually sending so many ships and trains, amazing strengths we have got. And the great thing was there was no dearth of friends, participants in today's event, and because of that, everything really panned out up to the expectation. Having said that, out of these amounts that have been pledged, especially because it was mentioned that multilateral institutions have actually pledged as well, it will be when you talk about International Development Bank and various other institutions like that, what you will see is basically it will be contingent to what you asked, how effectively we are communicating with IMF, right? This whole idea that somehow pledges are made but money doesn't materialize is because usually they are project-based or project-focused events or for funding. Okay. And when there are some certain bottlenecks, then it stops. But this time, I hope it doesn't happen because we have seen this plan that we presented, Sana. It was done with coordination with World Bank and of course UNDP. They also were supported because really openly, and that was, I'm really grateful that there was so much compassion and support. And Islamic Development Bank, that was another example. The highest pledge came from that bank, and so Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries or others as well. So there is such a great amount of goodwill right now that if we do our part well, lastly, it all is going to be contingent on one thing, that is transparency. If the Prime Minister's dashboard that was supposed to be there, if it takes off and it is that effective and is updated in real time, I think that all support will continue to come.
Right, and that's of course very important. Waqar Saab, considering of course that when we take a look at the development with regards to this money coming in and how Pakistan will be able to utilize, you mentioned earlier also that a lot is also going to depend on how we're going to actually capitalize on it and how it's going to trickle down to the people who really need it. And unfortunately also in the past we have seen that there have been such issues in other catastrophes in Pakistan. We've also seen that perhaps the people who really needed the help weren't quite getting it, and there may be a number of reasons for it, but especially now when of course we've been talking about this at an international scale in terms of climate change justice and the fact that Pakistan really needs the support. How do we ensure that the kind of projects and the kind of development work that is required is something that Pakistan is able to then implement? Of course, one aspect is the transparency that Farooq was talking about, but there is much needed to be able to move in that direction in itself, because we've had troubles with work, transparency in work. We've had troubles with structures and coordination among organizations, or actually implementing the kind of projects that have been discussed. How do we overcome those?
Well, Sana, before going into the answer of your question, let me share that international community has constantly been keeping pressure on Pakistan in terms of having transparency in disbursements and the money reaching to the actual intended population and rest of the things. But I think the time is over. Pakistan is amongst the countries that has been having one of the most robust disbursements mechanism through Benazir Income Support Program. We have conducted a poverty census in this country in which the socio-economic profiling of each and every household is available in a national database which is totally computerized and totally controlled, totally
accessible as well.
Inaccessible for any changes, I would say. So that provides enough transparency for the international community. With regards to the political commitment of international community, while making so much delays in coming forward and pledging a response to the flood affected population, I think that the political commitment from the international community was the missing link, was the lacking area. on which the international community has now rightly reflected upon, and the result is in front of us. And so we have been receiving more than $10 billion pledges. On one hand, these $10 billion will not only be providing a bailout package to Pakistan to combat the economic recession right at the moment faced by Pakistani government, but it will also help in reducing the catastrophes and in reducing the challenges faced by the flood affected community in Pakistan. At the moment, 500 people are displaced in Pakistan because more than 10 districts are still waterlogged. There are more unattended births expected in next trimester. There would be lower immunization rate in upcoming year. There would be low yielding. There would be there would possibly a food crisis in Pakistan. So I think that international community will have to reflect upon still that they'll have to keep Pakistan supporting in terms of graduating from this or skipping from this challenging situation which has been caused by a climate induced calamity, which was not because of Pakistan, which was because of international community. Since we contribute less than 1% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the world, but we are amongst the top 10 countries which has been facing the worst effects of climate change. And let me also share that Pakistan has 700 glaciers, which is the largest number after the poles for any country in the world who has the glaciers, and these glaciers are melting. So because of the climate change. So it is not only our problem, it is the problem for international community, and international community will work hand in glove with Pakistan to help us combat this situation.
Right, absolutely. Let us also bring in the discussion, Mr. Eric. With regards to, of course, issues regarding environment change, perhaps you will be able to give us a better insight into the kind of requirements that exist. Pakistan, of course, has prepared its own response in terms of recovery and rehabilitation. But as Waqar Saab was mentioning, there are so many things that are connected with the kind of response that is required, and many other issues which are then, of course, also increasing, especially issues such as food security or health, or even with regards to the rehabilitation within the areas that have seen these floods in Pakistan. So a number of issues that are related and perhaps are going to have to be tackled in a more holistic approach. In terms of the way that you have seen so far countries respond to such calamities, and also particularly Pakistan responding to previous such catastrophes as well, what factors do you think need to be urgently addressed or kept in mind when we take a look at the way forward in how we're going to be able to proceed in a way that we can actually help prevent more damage in further climate-induced issues?
Thank you, Sana. First of all, I would like to highlight before the Geneva moves, we need to also shed light on the North and Damage Fund. I think that was a brilliant, remarkable achievement by the government of Pakistan. The COP27 in Egypt, that wasn't on the agenda. And the Pakistani, foreign minister and the climate change minister, they did a brilliant job on bringing that on the table. And it's just been a success story after that. It's progressive development, which we see today as well. And I think the global community, the international community, do realize that Pakistan, inside the country, they have solid setups when it comes to climate mitigation and adaptation policies. The Living in this initiative was, again, a brilliant initiative by the government of Pakistan. We need to revive the Indus River once again, which is the lifeline of the country. And I also think that even before we talk about the Geneva moves, we have seen a robust document, which is the 4RF. It talks about resilient recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction inside the country as well. And the Secretary General of the UN also mentioned that today, that we see developments, progressive developments in Pakistan when it comes to climate mitigation policies and the way we are actively approaching towards fighting this calamity. So once we have solid structures inside the country, that's only when the international community will take us seriously, and they are taking it seriously. So we need to keep up the momentum, and we need to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. And more importantly, what I believe is we need all provinces on the same side. We've seen political rifts, the provincial rifts when it comes to different provinces. Once the country is united, I think that's going to send out a brilliant, message outside in the world community. Lastly, I also want to talk about more than the world community, South Asia must unite as a region as well. It's SARC, the regional organization, it's been on the ventilator for a very long time because of the political rifts between India and Pakistan. And I think the COVID-19 crisis, the climate trauma which we face today, is a golden opportunity for South Asian countries to unite together. With climate change, it's a borderless challenge. And I think Pakistan, India, Bangladesh is one of the most, even Maldives, they're one of the most climate vulnerable countries out there. So we need the region to unite. And that will bring about a better climate response and make countries resilient as well.
Right, absolutely, and that's important, but you've highlighted, of course, a very important, perhaps a difficult prerequisite to the kind of response that we need both within Pakistan and, of course, internationally as well. When we take a look at these factors, of course, there's a lot of political and economic concerns that also guide the country's behavior, and because of that, perhaps we have suffered in terms of the kind of collaboration that could have existed. But what we also have seen within Pakistan is that when we talked about the floods in 2022, we also refer to the floods back in 2010 or the previous floods as well. And every time we have spoken perhaps in the same language with regards to these catastrophes, that this is something that is unprecedented, which means perhaps that the kind of lessons that should have been learned along the way may not have been learned. Of course, we are at a position where we're talking about the urgency or the gravity of the situation. But do you think that Pakistan is able to look back and perhaps not repeat the same sort of mistakes that were done so in the past and the kind of efforts that were not made? I understand you pointed out a few major things that can be done, but with regards to even early responses or the kind of strategies that are needed or the kind of measures that need to be taken, do you think that they will now be taken that hasn't been done in the past?
Reverse climate change. Yeah. It's too late to reverse climate change, but what we can do is we can minimize the damage. And we can minimize the damage by actually introducing and implementing climate mitigation and adaptation policies. Like I mentioned earlier, the River Initiative, and when it comes to the framework to rehabilitation, resilient recovery, we need to invest in people. We need to invest in people who have suffered. More than 30 million people suffered. They become climate displaced people inside the country. We need to make sure these people start living with dignity again. And how can that happen? We need to introduce a green wave. We need to introduce a green revolution inside the country. We've seen that in many developed countries. It's difficult for Pakistan and South Asian countries, considering the political and economic crisis, but that's the way forward. Bangladesh, I think at the same time, they've introduced very progressive green initiatives inside the country, and Pakistan can obviously take lessons from Bangladesh as well. I think it's just the start. There's going to be more catastrophe. Like Farooq mentioned, our glaciers are melting, and there are reports that in the next 20, 30 years, more than 50% of the glaciers will melt. Now, that will create a big climate displacement. I call it a climate refugee problem. And there would be a situation where people will have to move, reallocate to different countries as well. That's already been talked about in Maldives. Many people in Maldives are thinking about moving to India or even New Zealand or Australia as well. So these are real issues. I think climate displacement will be one of the biggest issues that Pakistan should be able to work on right now, making sure we can minimize the damage. At the same time, I mentioned how we see the problems at the glacier side. We're also seeing rising sea levels as well. I myself visited many islands in South Pakistan, and they're all disappearing. That's not in the news. Those people deserve some attention. Those people need shelter. They need to be reallocated to safer locations so they can start living with dignity again.
Right. Farooq, of course, these are important aspects, and beyond, of course, the issues of political consensus or political unity in terms of moving forward. What else do you think is there as a challenge in us moving towards policies or the kind of green revolution or green measures that Mr. Eric was talking about, that countries like Bangladesh have taken that we haven't so far? Why is that? What's stopping us?
Right, Sana. I think that in countries like Pakistan, especially in Pakistan, terms like green revolution also might be misleading, because when during Ayub Khan's time green revolution so-called occurred, at that time East Pakistan was not actually on were taken care of. So it was one-sided business, right? That has been happening because our elite actually usually comes from certain parts of the country. Other parts have perhaps not paid that kind of attention, and then there are many other problems as well. But at this moment, what all we need to do is take sound advice. And I give you one example. Today, I don't know whether you listen to the Japanese, delegation, their presentation. Although it was given in Japanese, but I was listening to the translation, and it was granular in detail, as if the people are sitting inside Pakistan and they know embankments, how to actually correct embankments, how to take care of certain parts, water diversion, water pumping out, and all those things. When you have such robust allies, you can do a lot, Sana. At this moment, as I pointed out earlier as well, there is a reason why Pakistan is a parliamentary democracy, and people who are actually privileged keep on pushing for presidential system because they come from certain parts of the country. But the rest of the parts of the country, especially because of the territorial house, that is Senate, and popular house, that is National Assembly of Pakistan, they get a voice. And as long as they have voice, I think Pakistani Federation will be able to take care of all those areas which were neglected in the past. But at this moment, I think this is a game changer. This is a moment that can be defining in our history. We can regress. We can convince ourselves that perhaps whatever sab acha hai, jaise chalta tha, waise chalega. But if you want to change things, now is the time. And there is enough push from international partners that we can actually bring about the change as well, and there is granular detail. Then let me also point out the Prime Minister's press talk today when he was telling us what he said to the IMF chief. I mean, when you have a leader like that, who is literally pleading Pakistan's case to international community. Then our rest of the cabinet members, Shari Rahman, Foreign Minister, umpteen other people, amazing team at this moment. So we have the kind of consensus, and by the way, there was one great example, one more great example that I saw. Not only since delegation was there, but Taimur Jhagda, the finance minister of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, was also there. So it was a whole of nation response. And I think when you have this kind of catastrophe, because the people who have been displaced are not merely in one location, they are all across the country. So because of that, and because they are also voting constituents, I think now our elite will start listening to sound advice, and will be able to affect the kind of change that we need right now.
Absolutely, and that is of course the hope. Dr. Ghulam, there is of course a lot in terms of what the government or the ministries has been doing, especially in the aftermath of the floods. And we've seen that there has been, as Farooq was mentioning, quite a proactive approach, and we've seen the success of that both in the Geneva conference and prior to that at the COP27 as well. But in terms of what is required as a more holistic response in the years to come, how do we bring in perhaps the private sector involved in this as well, especially companies who are of course contributing a lot in terms of carbon emissions as well, and who need to have that sort of responsibility, because we may of course be contributing much less as a global response as to what other countries may be contributing. But within Pakistan as well, perhaps there's also a need to be more climate responsible.
And by the way, let me also add to this question, sir, because Sana talked about industries. Let me also actually add to it real estate sector, because they seem to be the biggest polluter right now. In Lahore, they keep on polluting the canal there. This happens in Banigala, elsewhere, all over the country. How can you convince all of them to mend their ways so that our economy and our climate policy both can go hand in hand?
Thank you so much, Sanan Farosab. I think let me, before saying something about the private sector, in terms of the government sectors, I think the first priority should be the realization of the climate change. And now currently we can see that how much seriously this government is, and then how much seriously they realize the importance of the climate change. Though it was not, if you can think of like a decade ago, it was not realized that much. The seriousness or the intensity was not much there on the table. Now, again, even if now we can see the public sector development program in Pakistan, we can see the realization there. But still, if we compare the projects with the other sectors, the climate and the environment projects with the other sectors, still, I would suggest we need lots of financing there, so that we need PSDP allocations most towards the climate environmental priorities as well. So that is something I think we also need to emphasize here on the role of the government and how much government in terms of financing take it seriously. Now comes to the private sector. No doubt the role of the private sector is again very significant and very much important here. I would suggest that the public sector along with the private sector should work in cohesion, so that a plan should be formulated in a way that should definitely answer to the climate environmental responses there. Now there's a different modules out there and how we can basically develop that mechanism. That is a technical discussion, but I would suggest definitely a very proactive approach along with the private sectors that the government can play. Just to give an example recently of the cement industry that was recently established in a previous government in Punjab. One of my colleagues said that those areas where the cement industries were established, they are severely now seeing the water crisis there. So how we can basically bring in private sector more accountable here? I would say the bigger pie is there, but one of my small suggestion out of the bigger pie is that our regulatory side should work very proactively there, so that they can basically manage the private sectors.
Right,
There's a
Dr.
lots
Samad,
of program for the private
that's
sectors.
that's great. But you were talking about two aspects or two iterations of the public sector, right? One, you mentioned PSDP, and the second thing, of course, the role of regulators. Now, the problem with PSDP is transparency, and that has been a problem because it is the place where it goes to the grassroots level, and perhaps the departments don't do justice. By the end of the term, out of fear of the funds being lapsed, they have to actually throw money out. Similarly, when you talk about regulators, a lot of collusion actually takes place where people are bribed. What are the cures to that, sir?
Definitely, for some, I agree with you. But again, by the end of the day, you need some mechanism there, right? So if the regulator, with some reason, doesn't work there, then you have to work that. What are the lacunas there? So I totally agree with you, and I buy your argument there. But by the end of the day, we have to work there so that we can bring in a justice there. I've been working with the Planning Commission for almost, I would say, 10 years. PSDP, one of the main concern there. I agree with you. There's a lots of issue with the PSDP allocations. But do we have, if we can work here, and if we can kind of, I would say, bring in a framework, a financial framework, if we can directly allocate the funds, definitely I agree, we can go there. But currently, the prevailing mechanism is the PSDP. So lacunas are there, caveats are there. But if we can bring in some kind of a transparency within the system, so that would be my suggestion for UFSA. But I totally buy your argument. The collusion argument is there. The transparency in PSDP allocations and the lapses of the fund, due to most of the time, it's been the capacity issues are there, and fortunately, with those capacity issues, the funds are not appropriately utilized. So I agree with you.
Absolutely.
But I was
And
suggesting
these are
here.
important points, Dr. Ghulam, but thank you very much for joining us. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you very much, Dr. Ghulam Samad. Thank you, Mr. Eric Shazar, and thank you, Mr. Vakar Shirazi, for being with us in this conversation, and of course, Farooq, for being a part of the debate. Absolutely. This is, of course, something that is very, very important and close to our hearts and important to Pakistan, especially now and, of course, in the future as a global response as well. And we hope that we can see that and we understand the urgency and the requirements of the situation. That's all we have from the debate. Hello.
The devastating impact of climate change upon everyday life is vividly evident now. Debunking